customers. Next, we're going to have a nice conversation on some of the startups in the region, moderated by Jeff Tingley of Rhode Island Commerce Corporation. And we're going to feature Drew Carey from Inspire Environmental, Neal Fine from Aquanis, and Charles Donadio of Atlantic Wind Transfers. Are all of you here?
Yes.
Neal is here.
Perfect. So I am going to pass it over to Jeff to introduce everyone. Thank you so much for joining us.
Avi, thank you very much. And first of all, a real shout out to Venture Cafe and Ocean, especially Toonie, Avi, and Amy, and Elise for making this happen. For those of us who are involved in offshore wind, really the growth of the industry here is paramount to our mutual success and really the success of the industry as a whole. As we heard in the earlier presentations, much of the early technology, processing, expertise is coming from Europe. And that's really starting our growth off very quickly. However, as Alexander said in his presentation, there are large European companies either moving into the US with their own operations, with joint ventures, and are working with our local supply chain in preparing for the opportunities that lie ahead. This area is really unique in the fact that we have physical assets in ports. We have incredible educational assets such as URI and UMass Dartmouth, and a very highly skilled workforce. So while there is a migration from Europe over here, and what's also happening is we're seeing an exponential growth in companies being formed in this area to support offshore wind. And this is going to be really an essential part of the growth and forming an American offshore wind industry. And on this panel, I'm really thrilled. We've got three wonderful local companies who are experiencing great success in the offshore industry and are really poised to grow as the industry expands. Inspire Environmental, Atlantic Wind Transfers, and Aquanis are involved in very different segments of the offshore wind industry, and they bring unique perspectives on how we can grow the industry at large. So we're fortunate to have Drew Carey, founder and CEO of Inspire Environmental, Charlie Donadio, founder of Atlantic Wind Transfers, and Neal Fine, founder and CEO of Aquanis, with us this morning. So in order to get into the issues, I think we'll start right off. So I'd like to start by having them each briefly describe their companies before we get into a discussion on their perspectives on an American offshore wind industry. So with that being said, Drew, let's turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jeff. It's good to talk to so many of you today. Inspire Environmental is a Rhode Island-based firm that conducts seafloor characterization. So essentially, any human activity in the ocean eventually has some effect on the seafloor. And we've developed a number of techniques to assess those effects. It's been very effectively applied to a lot of issues concerned with offshore wind. As we got into the industry, we've begun to expand, and Alan Roberts really presaged this by talking about cost reduction, risk mitigation, health and safety, environmental impacts, and his last one was impact on users. So we've addressed each of those issues in relation to offshore wind. Over time, we started in 2009 with the industry, and it's being successful in each of those areas. Not every company spans them all, but we've found various ways to support each of those crucial needs.
Thanks, Drew. Charlie, a little bit about Atlantic Wind Transfers and your business.
Yeah, my original company is Rhode Island Fast Ferry, which is based here in Quonset Point, Rhode Island, and we've been involved in high-speed ferry passenger service for about the last 25 years, operating up and down the East Coast, the West Coast, the Caribbean islands, and also Bermuda, and came about the offshore wind industry through Cape Wind, when we were getting involved with potentially providing transport services for at that time was Siemens Gamesa turbines, a long time ago. And after that project went wayside, I continued the research going to Europe meeting with other operators in my field, and discovered that there's definitely somewhere the space that we want to be in, because it's just like carrying passengers. We're just running passengers and cargo back and forth to turbines as opposed to islands. So we made the investment and worked with Deepwater Wind, and we're involved with the construction, and now also the long-term O&M, which is now owned by Ørsted with GE turbines. And we most recently have a new contract. We'll be moving down to Virginia, establishing a base down there. We want a contract with Dominion Energy to provide crew transfer vessel services for the 2 turbines they're installing now as a long-term O&M project, working with Siemens Gamesa out of So we have a new vessel under construction at Blount Boats, which is based in Warren, Rhode Island. That's where we built our first vessel, the Atlantic Pioneer. And that CTV will be delivered late fall, commissioned, and then delivered down to Virginia to be at service to support the turbines. We are looking to expand up and down the whole East Coast. We have great opportunities to expand our services, not here just in Rhode Island, out of Point, which hopefully will be a big port for offshore wind in the future, but also projects off Massachusetts and all the way down to North Carolina.
Thank you, Charlie. Neal, a little bit about you and Aquanis would be a great way to start now, or a great way to continue, I should say.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks, Jeff, for inviting me to the panel. Glad to be here and see so many COVID faces and COVID haircuts. So Aquanis is a technology startup. So we started in 2015. We have headquarters in East Greenwich and my basement, which is where I am now. So we have a mission to develop technologies that, broadly speaking, will reduce the cost of wind energy, both offshore and onshore. We are innovating in 3 broad technical areas. The first is wind turbine controls, individual wind turbine controls. The second is wind farm level controls and wind farm optimization. And the third is lightning protection. So we have currently 3 products that are under development. The first is in the area of wind turbine controls is related to on-blade active lift controls, what we call it. So on-blade controls will allow wind turbines to react quickly to changes in the wind. It'll give another tool for designers, in addition to pitch, to regulate power and reduce loads due to gusts and turbulence and wind shear and the like. So that is sort of a long-term play that'll be for next generation wind turbines, and offshore wind is the beachhead for that product line. The second product is a wind farm optimization tool that utilizes an algorithm called extreme loop seeking control that will allow wind farms, both onshore and offshore, to continually operate at their optimum levels, individually and collectively, using a novel algorithm that we're developing with the university. And then the third technical area, and the third product line, is a blade coating that will improve the performance of existing lightning protection systems. And that is a product that should be available in 2021. It's undergoing beta testing now. And all of these product areas and areas that we're innovating are intended to have an impact on LCOE. As I said before, that's our main mission, is to work with owners, operators, and OEMs to bring new technologies to the industry that will impact LCOE. We are funded currently through a mix of venture capital and federal and state funding grants from DOE, NSF, and Rhode Island Commerce as well.
Thank you, Neal.
Yeah.
You know, as we have a very interesting panel here, I'd like to sort of have a discussion about some topics I'm sure will be pertinent to those on the line. And, you know, Drew, I'll start with you. when you were starting your business to support offshore wind, what were some of the major factors in your decision making and in your analysis of a direction to take Inspire Environmental?
Well, so it's kind of interesting, Jeff. When we got involved in offshore wind, it was directly our local connection. So Deepwater Wind at the time was smaller than my company is now. They, of course, had substantially bigger financial backing, but they only had 3 people. And they needed local content, they needed local presence. We had a long history of working in Rhode Island in the environmental realm. So it really started with our core competency. But then as time moved on, as we understood more of the challenges in the industry, and I think Alan captured them very, very accurately, we really kept innovating and growing our workforce to meet those requirements. I can give you one very specific example that I think is very pertinent right now, which is that the health, safety, security, and an environmental HSSE requirements of the offshore wind industry is the highest really in any industry that we've involved in, and that means it's higher than offshore oil and gas. So for small companies directly involved in O&M or survey work, you really have to up your game, and you have to be prepared to engage with what is now become multinational, multi-billion-dollar companies. So negotiating a contract, having an HSSE requirement, you have to be prepared to do that. So in many cases, it may be necessary to team with larger firms that have some of that existing capacity. So I think it's really important to sort of pay attention to the nature of the industry. We've moved from startups, which Deepwater Wind was, to dominance by these large European firms. They bring a lot of expertise, and for local companies to get involved, you need to recognize that it is a major step to have a contract with one of these companies. And so starting at a place where you're perhaps subcontracting to other firms, working on teaming agreements, joint ventures, these are probably ways to get that start.
Excellent, excellent. You know, hey, Charlie, I'd ask you the same question. I mean, you were looking at, you were doing island ferry services, saw this opportunity with an offshore wind, and you know, as you looked at that, obviously there were some vessel changes, et cetera. So what was part of your decision-making process that made you say, this is a good long-term play for Vineyard Fast Ferry and therefore to start Atlantic Wind Transfers?
Well, just like Drew, it was a project, Deepwater Wind was pretty much in our backyard, and they were, you know, looking primarily for local content, but CTVs are not, were not around, not even one existed in the United States. So I pretty much came in and helped educate them on what these vessels were, and showed them what they needed based on our knowledge, my knowledge I learned from overseas and working with a local company that leads the industry overseas in Europe. And, you know, I obviously ultimately won the contract, but it was a natural crossover for us. I mean, the CTV vessels are primarily water jet or propeller, and our captains operate those vessels and have been doing much larger vessels with many more passengers and much worse conditions that we operate today now on the CTV. Standards, like you said, are another world. You know, there's definitely a lot of requirements that a normal company is not going to be able to just jump in the industry. There's an enormous amount of investment in safety protocols and requirements by this industry, which are driven by the European developers overseas. They've done this the last 15 years, and their standards are much higher than the oil and gas industry. So, you know, we're investing in that every day that goes by now because we know the direction it's going in. But yeah, it's a natural crossover for us, and the opportunity and the experience that we've gained we are the only operator in the United States based in Wisconsin that has the experience to operate these vessels and actually transfer technicians on and off the turbines via these CTVs. So it's been a good learning curve for us, and we're hoping to take that experience to the next project.
Great, thanks. Neal, I'm going to switch it up a bit with you. You know, you're a small company with very innovative technology. What do you find are the major challenges you face in working within this industry as a startup?
Well, so we're at the pointy end of the spear, right? We are developing technologies that we hope there to be some pull for. And so, you know, our largest challenge has been and continues to be obtaining the funding that we need to do full product development and third-party validation. So energy is hard because, you know, as far as venture capital is concerned, it's a very difficult space to be in because we need patient money. A lot of the work that we're doing is capital intensive, and in particular for the active load control that I mentioned, that's a long-term play, right? That in order to have full impact of that technology on LCOE, we have to redesign our turbines to include that capability. So we got to work with the OEMs and you know, each of these large turbines, particularly for offshore, require a 5-year, you know, 3 to 5 year design cycle, right? And so, you know, and we need to get onto large turbines in order to validate the technology before we even make it there. So funding is the number one challenge. I'd say number two is kind of driving the industry to accept new technologies. So, like I said, our mission is to, you know, reduce LCOE for wind. Our customers are going to be the owner operators and the OEMs, and so everything we do is aimed at improving their bottom line, and, you know, increasing revenues and profits for our customers, while also increasing the penetration of renewables and, you know, the grid energy market. So these are the things that motivate it. Historically, you know, wind turbines get larger and larger, particularly offshore, where we don't see the constraints, the transportation constraints that we see onshore. And just evidence of that is, you know, the Haliade X at 12 megawatts and the recent 14 megawatt machine announced by SGRE. Now, you'd think that just going larger will reduce LCOE. It does. You get access to higher, steadier winds aloft and can increase your capacity factors that way. But what many people in this industry understand, but outside on the edges and fringes of the industry don't understand, is that the manufacturers have to fight against physics in order to lower LCOE by going bigger, right? Because of what's known as the square cube law. The energy increases with the square of the blade diameter, but the costs often grow at a faster rate because the mass of the blades grows faster than the square. So the manufacturers and designers have to find technologies that will battle that, and have been successfully. You know, some of that is economies of scale, and there are other ways besides technology of reducing costs, of course, with O&M and all the other things that we can talk about. But on the technology side, you know, we have you know, manufacturing processes, materials, advanced controls. You know, there's a limited number of things in our toolbox. So, you know, we believe that the future of offshore wind in particular will be advanced controls like our active lift control system. And so, you know, the technology is great, and I know that developers and owner operators out there want technologies that will be proven and robust, but they better be bulletproof. So that is a challenge to convince the owner operators and developers that these new technologies are worth investing in.
Interesting. Thanks, Neal. You know, Drew, as you do your work with the developers, and as the wind farms get larger, the area gets larger, the data needs increase. What would you like to see from the offshore wind industry itself to help you be more effective for them? So there's more, you know, of a partner. I mean, are you seeing a higher degree of partnership being formed and a higher degree of sort of product and service and development happening now than you did when you started Inspire?
Well, it is a competitive industry. I think I'd break it down into maybe three major components. There are the developers themselves. There's a handful in the US that are in large part joint ventures. So most of the firms are actually joint ventures of a couple of different firms. So they are engaging with each other in complex teaming agreements and in other ways. So there's some of that collaboration occurring. But there's still competitive pressures between each of those groups. So I'm not necessarily seeing direct data sharing. A lot of the data is considered to be proprietary. The next phase I'd talk about would be really where you sit, which is in the shoreside state and supply chain support. And again, that's a competitive setting where as we've heard today, each state wants to promote its own capacity and capability. That collaboration, as you know, is beginning to happen. I think that's really critical. On a policy level, obviously governors have talked about collaboration, but it really starts at a very basic level of engaging technical support and really developing communication and trust between people, all really trying to achieve the same end, which is integrate supply chains within what I would broadly say is the Northeast sector. And then the third component is really in our wheelhouse, which is the environmental element. So there's a lot of different aspects of environmental data. There's biological, ecological data, there's a lot of physical data, a lot of geological data. And it's an amazing situation right now where we are now mapping Rhode Island Sound at a level of detail that has rarely been done anywhere, so that the resolution of the data that we're obtaining from certain areas of Rhode Island Sound goes down as low as 5 or 10 centimeters. So this is unprecedented. There's a few handful of places in the world where that kind of mapping has been done. That as it continues and it nests together, the combination of that data, the ecological data that's being collected, and then the long-term effects of these large-scale developments on the entire ecosystem are going to be a revolution in our understanding of our setting here. There's a couple of things that have happened. There is a Northeast data portal. There's a Mid-Atlantic data portal. There's some cooperative agreements so that as data becomes essentially public. So once you've submitted your data to BOEM, it is essentially public. And so we're working on a project right now to coordinate with the Northeast Ocean Data Portal to share data in a way, and it's already there, but there will be a lot of additional data that will be served to the entire public, stakeholders, research groups, developers, and that sort of thing. So, you know, there's differences between each of those sectors, but, you know, the great example, I think, is what you've experienced, is the collaboration of the ports in Europe between Belgium, Germany, Netherlands, where there was essentially a divvying up of supply chain between all these different ports depending on their capacity and their capability. And at the same time, the European science groups are sharing their data. Those, I think, are competitive. They create a collaborative advantage despite the fact that everyone is still in their own competitive, you know, sort of unit.
Thank you, Drew. Hey, Charlie, you know, you mentioned you're going to work in Virginia. You probably want to work in multiple states up and down the East Coast. What are the challenges behind that for you being a Rhode Island company? Are there different requirements by state? Do you have to sort of retune your business with each port you operate out of? So how does that affect your growth?
Yeah, I mean, each project's going to have its own you know, issues trying to find an adequate berthing location for these types of vessels as they get larger. And each project's going to have its own requirements regarding, right whales, speed restrictions, and things like that. We don't have too many hurdles. I mean, we've done this before. We've operated charters all over the country, so it's mainly just picking up shop and making what I would call a satellite office and start running the next day, because we've done it so many times now. In the future, as these projects get larger and you don't have these sort of pilot programs, it'll become more of a larger type of satellite location where you might have dozens and dozens of employees that are employed in that region. I mean, Virginia, we're looking at in the future to employ local employees down there in the future. But at this point, there's no way to do that because, we have the experience here in Rhode Island. We're going to bring it down there and ultimately in the long term of the contract, train some local people that we can bring in with us as well. So not too many challenges. It's just more or less taking what we do here and duplicating it somewhere else and bringing our experience to that location.
Great. Well, as we have a few minutes left, I have a crystal ball question. And Neal, I'm going to start with you. I'm going to make you the guinea pig of this. So, Neal, if you had a crystal ball, what do you think this industry is going to look like in 5 to 10 years? And how are you, as a nimble startup, preparing for that development? Do it in one sentence. No, I'm just kidding.
In one sentence. Oh, I'm a horrible prognosticator, but you can see there's momentum here for the offshore wind industry in the U.S. There is, I'm educating myself. I'm not an expert at many of the wind-related things that you need to be an expert at. Most of the people here know more about it, the economics than I do, but it certainly looks as though offshore wind makes a lot of sense for Northeast in particular. It's close to the demand load, and the prices are falling very quickly. And what we lack in supply chain, I think we make up for in determination. We will have supply chain fairly fast. I'm quite certain. So as for Aquanis, as you say, its product market fit is good with offshore wind. So our lead product being an on-blade active load control system for next generation wind turbines that will enable turbines of 15 megawatts and larger. We can, based on analysis that is performed at universities, we see potential cost and drop in LCOE of 10 to 30%. So 10% on the low side, 30 on the high. So those are big numbers, big claims as well. So that certainly need to be validated, and there may be things that happen on the way that prove to be bigger challenges. But I think to take advantage of it, we will continue to talk to owner operators, try to get some pull for the technologies that we're working on, relying on people like yourself to continue making introductions. We don't want to be a company that has solutions looking for problems. We really want to engage with people that are experiencing the pain points. So that's how we're going to try and take advantage of this.
Thanks, Neal. Drew, I'd throw the same question at you. I know you and I have talked at length about this and always find those discussions very interesting. So how's your crystal ball looking right now?
Well, Jeff, you and I have often talked about what I call sort of pinch points or bottlenecks in the process. I still think they are significant. So I'm cautiously optimistic, but I would assume, or I think it's reasonable to assume that many of the projects in the U.S. pipeline will be delayed by several years compared to the aims or ambitions of the developers. The pinch points are, you've got to have a power purchase agreement. A lot of those are now in place. You need to get a permit. There's not yet a single one permitted apart from the research permit for the project down in Virginia. So that is our current bottleneck, and it's partly there are so many projects trying to get through that small funnel. And there's a limited number of people on both sides of the funnel. That is the regulatory agencies approving them and the people providing the information. That will become tractable, but right now it's in serious delay. The next piece, of course, is the contracts in the supply chain. And there again, there is a lot of need and a very limited supply chain at the moment. The companies that are involved are very sophisticated about solving those supply chain problems. I know Tony can speak to this. Some of the other folks on the panel can. Bill Wall will be on later, I think, can talk about it. So everyone is planning ahead for that supply chain challenge. And that's really where I think many of the
other possibilities of trying to make joint ventures on that. But right now we're just concentrating on what we do best, and that's just transferring crew back and forth to the wind farms. And we are looking at every project down the entire East Coast.
Thank you, Charlie. Well, in the essence of time, Avi, we seem to be right at Charlie and Neal. Thank you so much for being part of this panel. It's a fascinating discussion, and I hope we can do this every year, and then we can play your recording from the year before and see if your crystal ball is as clear as I think it actually is. So once again, thank you so much, and thank you everyone who was on this panel and listening to it, and look forward to keeping in contact with you in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff.